This game sucks is exactly what went through Eric Barone's head just a few days before releasing his game Stardew Valley. Eric had spent the last 4.5 years working on it day and night entirely by himself, and he hated it. But it would near instantly become one of the most successful indie games of all time. So how did something its creator hated do so well? Let's find out. Now, making a game entirely by yourself is not easy. You need to know how to code, compose music, make art, and so much more. So where did Eric learn all of these skills? Eric's first source of inspiration was his parents. He describes his mom as a very artistic person, while his dad is a more logical, technical person. Eric was very interested in computers as a little kid, and his dad encouraged him to follow that interest. They had a computer with the MS-DOS operating system, and Eric would begin to mess around with the basic programming language at a young age. His dad said that he'd give Eric $5 if he could code a program that generates the Fibonacci sequence, a task often given to most beginner programmers. He tried to fool him by just printing out the sequence using a string, which is essentially just writing the sequence manually rather than having the computer do the math. So needless to say, Eric did not end the day with $5 in his pocket. But he didn't give up and would continue to learn programming in his free time. When Eric entered high school, he got really into music, likely thanks to his mom's artistic side. He played guitar, made music on his computer, was in a metal band, and later formed an experimental electronic pop band called 17 Colorful Feathers. When they released an album online, Eric wanted to include a game with it and made this, the official 17 Colorful Feathers adventure game. If you get stuck, the game's instructions tell you to message them on MySpace, which, well, just make sure you don't get stuck. In an interview with Eric, he thinks that this game is pretty embarrassing now, but for a random game made by a teenager for his band, I think it's pretty cool. Eric would soon get a job at Auntie Anne's, the pretzel place, and would draw stuff whenever things were slow. Once he graduated from high school, he enrolled in a local community college and took his first actual programming class, which he really enjoyed. Because of this, he decided that he would go to school for computer science at the University of Washington, Tacoma. Eric was still working at Auntie Anne's, and based on this video he posted at the time, you could tell he was having a great time. I can't play the music for copyright reasons, but it's that celebrate song. I'm almost certain you've all heard it, so I won't sing anymore. But Eric would soon become very thankful that he still worked there, as he would soon meet Amber Hageman, a newly hired co-worker at Auntie Anne's. Amber was drawn to Eric's creativity, and they soon began dating. One of their common interests is that they both love the Harvest Moon video game franchise, all of which are life simulation games where you inherit a small farm, clean it up, watch it grow, make friends with the nearby town citizens, go fishing, participate in festivals, and really just live the lifestyle of a rural farm owner. Eric and Amber would spend date nights playing Harvest Moon Back to Nature, passing the controller back and forth. Around the time Eric graduated from college, things were getting pretty serious between the two, and they moved in together to Eric's parents' house until they could afford to move out. With his brand new computer science degree, Eric began applying for jobs, but he wasn't having much luck. During interviews, he was always awkward and nervous and just really didn't do well. Something I and many of you watching can probably relate to all too well. Most job positions Eric could apply for were now filling up, and he began thinking of ways he could improve his quickly shrinking odds. He decided that he wanted to try making a video game. He soon decided on making his own version of Harvest Moon. Eric, like many other fans, had searched for years for a game that captured the magic of the early Harvest Moon games, but nothing existed. For a while, he even roleplayed on Harvestcraft, a fan-made Harvest Moon-themed Minecraft server, until activity fizzled out. The Harvest Moon series had fallen out of favor by most fans with the last few releases, due to a copyright dispute that would double the video's length if I tried to explain it, as well as a steep decline in quality. Like, look at this. What even is this? Why does this character not match any of the other graphics in the game? And the water in this river is flowing sideways? Unironically, Farmville looks better than this. Eric told Amber that his game would take him about 6 months, so he'd have a cool project on his resume once the next round of hiring started up. As you now know, his estimate wasn't even close. Over the next few months, Eric would wake up, make a cup of coffee, head over to his computer, and spend the rest of the day and night working on his game, which he would call Sprout Valley. Although, not for long, as he'd rebrand it to Stardew Valley soon after. Now, all developers also need a cool alias to go by, like how Marcus Persson, the creator of Minecraft, goes by Notch. Fans of Stardew Valley may know that Eric decided on Concerned Ape, but it wasn't his first choice. Originally, he was gonna go by the name, and I'm not joking, 3 Piping Hot Mouse. And before you ask, no, he never explained why. Eric took a pretty unique approach when it came to developing Stardew Valley. Most indie developers these days start with an engine built for making games, like Unity, Game Maker, or Godot, but Eric truly wanted to build this game from the ground up. Using his knowledge of the Java programming language from college, he taught himself C#, which he would code the game's engine in with the help of Microsoft's XNA framework. XNA isn't a game engine, but more of a set of tools to help developers make Windows and Xbox games. It is much harder than using an actual engine. In order to create pixel art, he began reading about pixel art theory and watched dozens of hours of YouTube tutorials. He would then make every piece of art in the game by hand in a program called Paint.net, which I actually use for most, if not all of the thumbnails on my RuneScape channel. There's my shameless self-promotion for this video. As you might have guessed, Eric also composed every piece of music in the game in a program called Reason. With every aspect of the game as his skills improved, he would go back and redo things. The portraits of the game's townsfolk, for example, were redesigned at least 10 times during development. He'd lose entire days just fixing things he had made weeks ago. Eric would also jump around quite a bit when it came to coding the game. He'd build about 90% of a feature, get bored, and switch to something else. Some days he was extremely productive, while others he got nothing done. He'd sometimes waste days on 8-hour sessions of Civilization, old Final Fantasy games, or just browsing Reddit. When Amber got home, he'd switch programs to make it seem like he hadn't just spent all day slacking off. But when he got an idea in his head of a feature he wanted to add to the game, he'd work non-stop until he was happy with it. It wasn't the most efficient way to make a game by any means, but it worked for him. Now, Eric's schedule didn't change much, if at all, every day. Since he was living rent-free with his parents, he didn't have to worry about money, and by now had given up the job search entirely. The fear of not finding a job was no longer the reason motivating him to make this game. Instead, it was a different kind of fear. He said, "I was afraid of the grind. I was afraid of sitting in a cubicle and programming something I thought really boring and I wasn't passionate about. I wanted something different, and I wanted the freedom to do whatever I wanted." Eric wanted to make this work no matter the cost. But living as a couple at your parents' house isn't ideal, and Eric and Amber soon wanted to move out together. But you need money in order to do that, something that the couple didn't have. So Amber decided to get a job as a caretaker that she would do on weekdays after school, and also got a second job working as a barista on weekends. Meanwhile, Eric would continue just working on the game in their apartment. Now, to most people, this arrangement sounds completely unfair, and maybe even unrealistic. But Amber didn't seem to mind. She said, "When we were living at home, it wasn't as hard. And then when we moved out to Seattle, the reality of having to support him became more real. But it really wasn't a problem ever. He was working so much that it was impossible to be frustrated." Eric would also pitch in other ways, like picking up the groceries and driving Amber to college in his beat-up old Toyota Camry with a broken driver's side door. That may seem insignificant, but remember this car for later. In mid-2000 2012, he felt as if he had done enough work to finally be able to show Stardew Valley to the public, and opened a website to document the game's progress. He shared it on a Harvest Moon fan forum, and many people there were instantly drawn to Eric's game. As I mentioned earlier, most of them had fallen out of love with the new Harvest Moon releases, and Stardew Valley looked really promising. As Eric continued working, Stardew Valley would become all-consuming. 8-hour days of work turned to 10, and then 12. With an audience watching now, Eric didn't want to disappoint. Eric's family and girlfriend would begin asking him when the game would be done. He'd say in 2 months. 2 months would pass, they'd ask again, and his answer would be the same. Eric said, "I had to prove that I wasn't just crazy, that this wasn't just a pipe dream, and that I was actually gonna follow through on it." That was really getting to me, psychologically, thinking about whether I was wasting my life, wasting my time. So part of my strategy was to convince the people around me that they should believe in me, but that was difficult. I was definitely embarrassed. Eric's duties as a partner took the back seat, and Amber began to feel quite lonely. She was fully supporting someone who she barely interacted with every day. She said that he would be working all day till 11:30 p.m., and I would be like, "Hey, you have to get off the computer. You have to do something with me. We have to eat dinner. We have to watch an episode of Star Trek." I needed more interaction with him. Although she was frustrated and missed spending time with him, she still believed in Eric's vision. In September of 2012, Eric thought that the game was nearly done. He felt that if he needed to, he could wrap it up in about 6 months. So he submitted Stardew Valley to Steam Greenlight, a program where indie developers could submit their games to Steam. Steam users could then browse submissions, vote on the ones they liked, and those with the most positive votes would be listed on the Steam store. Soon after posting it to Greenlight, Eric received an interesting email from someone named Finn Bryce. Finn is a British game developer who runs a company called Chucklefish. Finn made Eric an offer. For 10% of the game's profits, Chucklefish would be Stardew Valley's publisher. Their lawyers and PR staff would help Eric navigate the boring and complicated parts of making a game. Programmers would help him set up a better website, and later on, port the game to other consoles. This way, he could focus all his energy on actually making the game itself. Chucklefish was also developing a game called Starbound, which at the time had a huge amount of hype. Eric thought that this could be his big break, and for such a small cut, he agreed. On May 17th, 2013, Stardew Valley was officially greenlit by the community. The game would be coming to Steam. However, Eric's estimation of the game being ready in 6 months was once again wrong. He still had a lot more to do before he was satisfied. Even worse, money was becoming tight. By now, most of their savings were gone, and Amber was still in college, so she could only work part-time. Eric thought about putting the game on Steam Early Access, meaning players could buy and play the game before it was finished, but for a perfectionist like Eric, that just wasn't an option. So he got a part-time job as an usher at a nearby theater for a few hours a week. Making a game by yourself in your apartment for years is a really isolating experience. So Eric enjoyed being around and interacting with people again, even if he did feel a little embarrassed. He said, "There were points when I was depressed and just thinking, what am I doing? I have a degree in computer science and I'm working a minimum wage job as an usher at the theater. People would ask me, do you do anything else? And I said, I'm making a video game. I just felt embarrassed about it. They must have thought, oh, this guy is a loser." Around this time, he would get really anxious. More and more people were getting excited about Stardew Valley, but Eric thought to himself, I realized that it was crap, and I needed to do something better. Like, this wasn't going to be a big hit or anything. He went back to the vicious cycle of redoing old content, cutting features, and trying to improve the game the best he could, but he still wasn't happy with it. At the start of 2014, he realized something. Since starting work on Stardew Valley, he had never allowed himself to take a break. So he decided that for the next month, he would ignore Stardew Valley entirely and make a little Android game. On March 6, 2014, he released Air Pair, an endless runner type game focused on a hoverboarding pair. The game didn't do well. In fact, it's no longer on the Google Play Store, and the experience made Eric realize that he doesn't want to make mobile games. But it was a nice change of pace for a while. He got back to work on Stardew Valley, and by 2015, once again felt like the game was nearly done. But anxieties and dread began to creep back in. Eric had become sick of working on the game. It had basically consumed his entire life for the last 4 years, and he still had nothing to show for it. Even worse, he still thought the game was terrible. Imagine playing the same game every day for 4.5 years, all day. I was just absolutely sick of it. I was bored. I didn't even have an objective sense on if the game was good or not. In fact, I thought it was bad. Now, on the bright side, money problems were now easing up, as Amber had since graduated from college and began work as a full-time lab technician. They also moved into a house with 2 friends to get some more space and help ease Eric's loneliness. By late 2015, the game was truly nearly done, except for one feature: multiplayer. Eric had promised fans that multiplayer would be available by the time the game released, but it was taking much longer to code than he hoped. It was boring, monotonous work, and Eric hated it, so he decided to break his promise. It was time to give the people what they really wanted. On January 29th, 2016, Eric made an announcement. Stardew Valley would be out next month on February 26th, and would only cost $15. He was actually in the home stretch now. He spent the next month completely enveloped in his work, day and night, fixing bugs, adding new content, and just rushing to get things done. Chucklefish was able to help him through this last leg too. They sent early game codes to journalists and Twitch streamers, who would not only drum up hype for the game, but discover more bugs for Eric to patch. A process that he was previously doing all by himself. Despite only 3 streamers being given codes, the game quickly became one of the top games on Twitch and would frequently appear on the home page. But with all this work, he didn't sleep for days. Then, the evening before the game's launch, disaster struck. He had encountered a game-breaking bug. Eric doesn't remember what it was anymore, but it was bad enough to send him into a panic. He spent all night fixing it and fell asleep at his homemade standing desk early in the morning. Soon after he woke up from his nap, it was time to release the game. Eric, Amber, and their roommates gathered around the computer and waited for Eric to publish the game. He still had that thought in the back of his head that the game was crap, but luckily, he was wrong. The sales rolled in at an insane pace. It was an instant success. Eric was hoping to sell maybe 10 or 20,000 copies at the most, but by the end of the first 2 weeks, he had sold 500,000, and dozens of perfect and near-perfect reviews from major publications were pouring in. Despite all his doubts and anxieties telling him otherwise, Eric had created one of the best games of all time. But Eric still wasn't done. As sales continued to rise, he would spend the next few weeks fixing every bug that popped up. If a bug was so bad that it broke a player's save file, he would personally fix it for them. Seeing players have issue with the game really affected him, and he felt like he owed them solutions as soon as possible. He was now working about 15 hours a day, much more than before the game launched, but really it was all worth it. By April, sales hit 1 million, but then Eric broke. About halfway through 2016, Eric just couldn't do it anymore. After nearly 5 years of non-stop work, he needed a big break. He had started on the multiplayer mode, but it was beyond monotonous, so for the first time ever, he got help. Chucklefish offered to task one of its programmers with making the multiplayer mode, and Eric accepted. After a long break full of alcohol, a plant that you can't grow in Stardew Valley, and ashwagandha, he got back to work creating new content and expansions for the game. Fast forwarding a bit, Stardew Valley has since sold over 30 million copies, and has been ported to any gaming platform you can think of. Eric is now a millionaire multiple times over, but hasn't let the money change him. 6 months after the game's launch, with $12 million in his bank account, he still chose to live in that house with Amber and his 2 friends rather than buying his own. And he drove his beat-up old Toyota Camry with a broken door until it finally gave out. He kept it as long as he could, but the final straw was water leaking into the cabin, causing fungus to grow all over the steering wheel, which honestly just sounds like a scenario straight out of the world of Stardew Valley. Speaking of which, he hasn't forgotten about his game. Stardew Valley is still receiving massive amounts of new free content every year, and Eric makes frequent appearances on the game's subreddit. He since parted ways with Chucklefish as well due to a number of controversies coming out of the studio, but has thankfully hired his own team to help him expand and maintain Stardew Valley. Eric also got to meet the creator of Harvest Moon, Yasuhiro Wada. Wada played Stardew Valley for the first time, gave it a ton of praise, and even signed Eric's old SNES copy of the original Harvest Moon. Eric has since started work on another game called Haunted Chocolatier, although he's keeping the details about the game mostly under wraps, but he's making it the same way he made Stardew Valley, alone. But just because he's doing it alone doesn't mean he's lonely, as Amber is still with him by his side to this day. Eric's story is an inspiration to everyone out there that with enough persistence, you can truly accomplish whatever you want in life, but also a warning that if you let it, it can be all-consuming to the detriment of yourself and especially those around you.